So thank you again for tuning into this morning's A&R Hour. I am Melissa Mitzi. I am the Fulton County A&R agent. Today we are going to be talking about, we wanted to slate in some alternative gardening methods, and something that we've had a lot of questions about and a lot of interest in, especially these days, is aquaponics. And so I've asked Dr. Jay Shelton and Bob Redijak with Warnell to speak to us today about the aquaponics lab that they manage, and some of the outreach they do, and kind of, I think the way Dr. Shelton described it is we're going to take a trip through the aquaponics system like we are a drop of water. So just a little bit of a tour, and finding out some of the cool stuff they do there. So again, if you've never tuned into one of these things, how that works is we are going to, if we have questions, if you could type them into the chat box, and then at a natural transition, I will bring them to their attention. Don't panic, I'm not ignoring you. I am taking roll for everyone, just to report to your PDCs that you are attending. And again, towards the end, we'll have time for questions, so you can unmute yourself and discuss that way. But for the sake of time during the presentation, if you could just type questions into the chat box so we can keep things on track, that would be good to go. So we have an hour set aside today. So just like all the other ones, it should go pretty quickly. But without any further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Shelton and Bob.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. I think we'll just jump right into the PowerPoint, and if all the technology cooperates, we'll get started here. All right, so I know this is very distracting, but it seemed like a cool idea at the time. The idea here is we're just going to take a little brief tour of our demonstration greenhouse. Some of you, I think, have been there and have visited, but we're going to follow a drop of water as it goes through our system. And then as we go through, we're going to point out the different components that are involved in our aquaponics system, and then the different processes that are critical to making it work right. But we decided, Bob and I talked about this, and we decided to do this because our system is not fancy and it's not necessarily showy, but it's sustainable because it's been up and running for 3 years. For 3 years now, producing multiple crops per year, producing kind of a warm season crop and a cold season crop every year. And we've had relatively few problems and no catastrophic issues, none whatsoever. So, the point is that it works and it's sustainable. But as Melissa, we were discussing this earlier, if you go online, if you search and you look for aquaponics, there's just so much information out there. Some of it's truth, some of it's false, some of it's just people trying to sell you stuff. So this is a very do-it-yourself, very low-tech way that we've developed, and we're just going to kind of take a tour of it. So, having said that, this is just an outside view of our demonstration greenhouse, and many of the parts were scavenged, yes, free from other things. That those grow beds there are actually old grease traps that were factory second grease traps, so they were free. Did spend a little money on a fancy viewing window, which allows us to view the fish, and that's certainly not necessary, but for a demonstration project, it's a pretty good idea, I think. And Bob, jump in here as we go along, but this is pretty low tech. There's certainly nothing fancy about this at all.
And it's an unheated greenhouse. We grow it year round, but we heat the water with the tilapia in it, but we do not heat the greenhouse itself. So we switch over to winter crops like cabbage, lettuce, stuff like that in the winter.
So anyway, as I said, we're going to follow a drop of water as it goes through the system, and we had to start somewhere. So we're going to start at the lowest, elevation-wise, the lowest point in our system, which is the sump tank. And our concept is
one pump.
One pump. Simple is better.
Yeah.
There's a lot of complex aquaponics designs out there. Some of them have multiple pumps. we like this very simple, straightforward method where you just basically, your sump, where all the water is collected is at the lowest elevation point in your system, and that's where you put your pump. All right, so one pump, and that one pump recirculates water throughout the whole system, and we're going to kind of walk you through that now, component by component and process by process. So we're starting, and you'll get the idea of what we're trying to show you here in a second, but we got diagrams and then we got actual photos of what it looks like in our system.
So we have a sump pump with a float switch there that once the tank fills to a certain level, it'll trigger the pump and it'll put the water back into the fish tank.
And so that sump and that pump delivers water to the fish tank, as Bob said, and then some of the important processes that it provides for us in the culture unit or in the fish tank are aeration of the water where the fish are living and circulation of the water where the fish are living. And this is all simple PVC construction, basic plumbing, and you see what we call a spray bar is, well, we'll show you here, is a PVC pipe with holes drilled in it that we can directionally deliver the water so that
concentrated spray
so that it aerates the water, and it also creates a circular flow in the tank, which is important for reasons that we'll cover here in just a second. So you see that spray bar circulating and aerating the water, and that's one of the important first steps in terms of processes, good quality aerated water, but also creating that circulation pattern, because as that water is sprayed into the tank, and you notice for culture units, for fish tanks, we like round tanks. We like tanks without angles. And there's few reasons for that, but one is that schooling fish tend to get crowded in corners, and they can actually injure themselves bumping into corners, and you don't have that problem there are no corners in our tanks. And also, there's a certain degree of self-cleaning that we want to promote by creating this circular flow by using that directional spray bar. And one of the things that does is it concentrates the particulate waste. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about managing particulate waste, because this is sort of a fallacy or a myth about aquaponics, is that we feed plants fish poop. And that's only partially true, in that fish waste, which we'll talk about a lot, has multiple components to it. There's the dissolved waste, and that contains a lot of important nutrients. Then there's the particulate waste, and that contains things that we don't necessarily want to allow to get into our grow beds. That it basically contains things we need to remove from the system.
Right. You want the solids not in your grow beds.
Right. And a good way to think of this in terms of the organic matter that you're producing is there's organic matter that is desirable in different parts of the process, and there's organic matter that is not desirable. So the high carbon organic matter, we really want to remove it from the system. If it stays in the system, it just serves as a substrate to grow bacteria. That's what it does, and we don't want that. And it also
bacteria that you don't want.
That's right.
The undesirable.
Undesirable bacteria, and also can clog some of your water movement, so cause you some obstructions. So it's all about managing waste. So here you see our round fish tank with a viewing tube, and you see the sump to the right bottom. You see the float switch on that. I don't know if y'all can see my pointer. If you can, there's the float switch with the which this is not exactly a continuous operational pump. When this sump tank fills, the float switch shuts off the pump. When that sump tank drains, because all the water is being pumped out of it, then the float switch switches back on. Another important component you'll notice, we put lots of valves in everything, including these anti-reverse valves, which are anti-reverse valves. More valves is always better, as opposed to not being able to control water movement through your system at multiple places. So you see that spray bar up here at the top, just lays across the top of the culture unit or top of the fish tank and delivers the water from the sump. All right, so in terms of the basic needs of fish that we're trying to provide here, we got to think about, we mentioned already aeration and we mentioned the circulation, but there are other things to think about, and this basically involves water quality. So I wanted to point out the fact that we're not going to go into any detail today about water quality management, but in order to manage water quality, you have to be able to measure it. And we actually have daily data sheets that we fill out where we monitor water quality for a couple of key parameters that we can talk about later. Monitor water quality on a daily basis for a couple of key parameters. But other important things that we monitor on a daily basis include how much we feed the fish. And that's one of the most important ways to monitor the well-being of the system is, are the fish eating the way you want them to? All right, so you'll see this is a underwater view of our tank. And you'll kind of notice that we've got a few key components here. Well, you might not know they're key components yet, but we want to take a minute to talk about those. And one of those is that if the power shuts off, the fish tank doesn't drain. It doesn't go dry. And we do that using a standpipe. And I'm going to see if it's ahead or back. Yeah. So this is a great shot to see a key component here, which is the standpipe goes right up the center, but we put a second larger diameter pipe around that standpipe that has these slots down in the bottom. And what we're trying to do there is, as the circulation directs the waste towards the bottom center of the tank, we collect that particulate waste in the outflowing water. It goes up. Maybe you can see it here. Here you go. You see it collects down here. It gets sucked up.
There should be a slide.
And it goes down. Let's see if we got that in there. We might. Yeah. So the water drains out of the standpipe in the center, but the water comes off the bottom. So we're drawing water off the bottom, directing it up and then back down through the standpipe. That's really important to kind of keep the amount of particulates accumulating to a minimum there in that tank. All right, we already mentioned aeration, so we do use, got a little redundant system here. We use these small, low head, high volume pumps, air pumps to aerate our system. You'll see how those operate. They're fairly inexpensive pumps for aeration purposes. And so in terms of what we call life support, just daily things to keep the fish happy, feeding is really a critical aspect here, because remember, we're not just feeding fish. Ultimately, we're feeding our plants. We're fertilizing our plants. So the overall, the big rule of thumb for adult fish and a good average across the board is to feed fish at a rule of thumb level of 2% of the total fish weight. So what that means is you either need to know or estimate the total weight of fish in your system, right? And that's pretty, when you start, you know the length of your fish, you can estimate average weight, you can take a subsample, you can weigh some of your fish when you first get started. But knowing that weight and then growing your fish, like we grow trees, we model the growth of trees, we can model the growth of fish based on assumptions like feed conversion ratios. And so all that, what that means is if you have 100 pounds of fish, you're going to feed them 2 pounds of feed per day. And that's the rule of thumb. Now, we talk a little bit more about the details of that, because in reality, we can feed small fish a lot higher rate. But one danger that a lot of people get into when they first start in aquaponics is overfeeding their fish. Yes. And so we start pretty conservative. In fact, everything we do is fairly conservative, because we're not trying to push this system, and we're not trying to make a profit with what we're doing. This is just a demonstration. Yeah, here's that. We finally found that slide. So this demonstrates how the water is drawn off the bottom, goes through the slots, is drawn up between that outer pipe and the standpipe, and then goes back down. And that's how we kind of have this automatic, continually siphoning system drawing that waste off of the pond so that we can remove it. Basically, we got to have a way to remove it. And then again, everything drains by gravity through the system and feeds by gravity from one component to another, meaning that we have our second component, what we're about to talk about next, which is called a swirl filter, is at a lower elevation than the height of the water in the culture unit, which is kind of like the highest point. So, and you'll see redundant valves throughout this system, and the plumbing that leads to the next component. So this is, and we'll show you a photo of this in a second, but we call it a swirl filter. It probably has other names, but here's the basic mechanics of it. The idea here is that we are trying to pull off the particulates, and we're taking advantage of gravity here and of centrifugal force. So lots of cool physics going on here. And in a photo, you'll see this, but we call it a swirl filter because the water is delivered into the filter in such a way that it, again, circulates around. And as it does, the heavier solids collect in the bottom of this cone and actually creates a kind of a sludge down here, which we can draw off. But the important process here is we remove those particulates before we do the next step. So here is a photo, and Bob actually designed and built these swirl filters. And I might get you to talk just for a second about that, Bob, but you see we recycle a lot of stuff here.
You can see if you look in the middle picture, you can see the water comes in at a right angle, and then that starts the circulation. And so the particulates will settle, and then the water you can see is pretty clear as it's going to be drained off the top. I've got an elbow with holes drilled on the side that the water will fill up, will go out that drain right there. And if you look at the right-hand picture, you can see the swirling, and then things will settle in the bottom, and then you could drain off that sludge, and that's good compost to put in a garden if you want to do composting. But it's not the material that you want to have. It's not the solids you want to have in your aquaponics system. You want to draw those solids out of the system.
All right, so just a kind of a side view overall design with the swirl filter here. The first stage of solid removal, there are multiple stages. This first stage of solid removal, and then by gravity, that water leaves the swirl filter. Goes on to the next.
One thing I want to point out is you see on the right-hand side, it says fish tank standpipe pipe, and then the water will enter that barrel in the middle, and it drains off the top. But the top drain is still below the fish standpipe pipe, so it's still always gravity feed, gravity drain.
And here's the next component added in, so you get an idea of how these components go from how the water flows from one to another, and how these components fit together. And so we call this a mechanical filter because we're just physically catching and removing solids from the system. This is one
that
important.
Didn't get removed from the swirl filter.
So some we collect here down in the swirl filter. If we didn't catch it there, for example, if it was too light and didn't sink, didn't settle out, then we mechanically remove this, and we'll show you what these look like. But this is just a filter pad, a trap, to mechanically pull off or remove those solids before they go into the next phase. But again, we still have that same concept. The height of the water here, higher, lower, meaning that we got gravity. And our next component that we travel to will be the grow beds. But before we do, here's side by side, you see the swirl filter and our mechanical filter. And then you see, these are just, you buy them in a roll.
Yeah.
It's
filter pads you cut to size.
Filter pads that you can cut to size and reuse. So we reuse these over and over again.
And you could see the solids build up in that filter pad, and that's just one day of draining tank. So then I would pull off that filter pad, put a fresh one on, and then spray off the the one that was in there, and then put that aside. So each day we rotate between two pads.
All right, so just as a reminder here, swirl filter flowing, gravity feeding into the mechanical filter. And now we're going to head to the grow beds. But really important part of this, and this is, we put these slides in here to kind of illustrate what Bob just mentioned, which is how important this is, the daily maintenance you got to do. Melissa, you got to say, you want to say something?
Yeah, we just had a quick question for clarification in that. Was that a smaller tub inside the swirl filter?
Oh, we should talk for a minute about Bob's design there. Yeah.
Yeah, we can touch on that for just like a second.
Yeah.
It's a bucket that I put there's a funnel in the bucket. I didn't have a funnel big enough to put into the barrel, but and I didn't get a chance to make a funnel to go in the barrel. So I just put a funnel in a bucket. So ideally you just want to have a funnel in the barrel, and you can cut plastic or whatever you need to do to make a funnel, but I just didn't do it in that case.
And they make fancy swirl filters. You can buy this already pre-made. In fact, I don't know if we put it in there. We had a picture of one. This is all totally do it yourself and use concrete.
Yeah.
So basically put the funnel in, fit it around there, and then just pour concrete around it.
Vermiculite.
With vermiculite to lighten it up.
That's right.
And if anybody's interested in designing a swirl filter, we can send you the description of how you can do it yourself swirl filter. Concrete, vermiculite, a big barrel, a bucket, and some plumbing. And
so that was just a 5-gallon bucket in the barrel.
All right, so that daily maintenance that we talked about here, basically you just collect that, and you can see the accumulation on a daily basis of particulates that we don't want entering our grow beds. We want all of the good nitrogen and phosphorus from the dissolved portion, but we don't want these particulates, and we'll show you why in a minute.
Yeah.
But this is just the daily required maintenance, is to pull that filter out.
It's a 2-minute job. You just put in a new filter pad, take out the old one, and then you got to spray it off.
Right. And then put it back in. And as I said, we can use them over and over again. All right. So just to take a look on the inside here, it's sort of a false bottom design here on a place to lay that filter pad that catches the water and then drains down. Lets the water freely move down through the.
There's a standpipe right in the middle of it.
And you see the hole for the standpipe where the water drains down through it. So this is just a way to deliver the water through the filter pad and to trap as much of those particulates as we can. And then, so that's stage 2 really of our filtration process before things go to the grow beds. So just to give you an idea of what we got going so far, we had our swirl filter, then our mechanical filter, and then the water is delivered again by gravity, because it's got lower elevation here than here, by gravity to our grow beds. And there's the end view of our fancy grease trap grow beds. And then here's the side view showing water inflowing from the mechanical filter components by gravity and delivered to this manifold. This manifold is just some plumbing that lays down on the bottom of the grow bed, and it's designed to uniformly deliver this nutrient-rich water to our plants in kind of a laminar fashion as it goes along the grow beds there. So we'll show you what that looks like. You see the inflow, and again, it's all about the height of the water. So you see the inflow at one end of the.
Go back one slide.
Okay.
You can see there's the mechanical filter, and there's the height of the standpipe in the mechanical filter, but it's still where the water's going into the grow bed is at a lower level. So it's all still gravity feed. So
coming in on this end and leaving on that end, which you see the inflow in here with, again, another valve, inflow here, and you see a rather luxuriant tomato plant there. And coming into our grow beds, and we'll show you a little bit about our grow beds here. We talked about all this is do it yourself, just long sections of PVC pipe capped on the ends and holes drilled in for distributing the water. And then we won't get into every imaginable substrate for doing aquaponics, but we're going to show you two different methods. And one involves a combination of a cheap substrate, which is gravel. And a more expensive but desirable substrate, hydroton. which is the ceramic, baked clay beads in our beds, and we'll show you that, and then we'll show you another system here because we got one of each. So here's the Hydroton. You probably, most of you all are familiar with this from its applications for hydroponics. You can purchase it locally. You can get it cheaper online, but it's basically just a substrate. It's a substrate that is relatively porous but inert, so that it provides a lot of surface area and it provides a lot of support for root systems of plants, but it is inert, so it's not reacting with the water in any way.
And just to say, in the tanks that we had, the grow beds, I have like 8 or 10 inches of just gravel. And then I have like 2 or 3 inches of this Hydroton, because it's easier to plant in, but it's more expensive than gravel. But you can plant straight into gravel if you want, but it's just a little harder to manipulate.
Just harder to move around and it's heavier, but it works.
And
it
that's
works
just
fine.
showing on the right side that there's water. The tank is just filled with water, gravel, and this Hydroton. So it's in a bed of water.
All right, so zooming through our system here, the other alternative is a raft system that does not have a continuous substrate bed. Basically, this is just
it has a little layer of gravel on the bottom.
Right, floating. So floating foam raft, which you'll see here in a second, with a small layer, just a few inches of gravel down on the bottom.
Hey, Jay, real quick about the gravel. Somebody asked about lava rock.
Lava rock. Yeah, lava rock works fine. It's not cheap. And the thing to think about with lava rock is when you first get it, there's a lot of, we like it because it's got a lot of surface area again. And of course it comes in different sizes. So the smaller sizes the smaller the sizes of the rocks you can get are better than big chunks. But it does tend, we've got our grow beds, whether they be filled with substrate or have the raft system, floating raft system. Either one, they seem to work. Both seem to work fine. Do you have a preference for any particular species? Like, for one thing, tomato plants are things that are going to get big and luxuriant and heavy and tall.
Yes.
You want to have the support that you get from the solid substrate.
Bigger plants are better in the substrate, the Hydroton gravel, than basil and
lettuce,
lettuce and stuff like that will grow in the floating beds very well.
Yeah.
So the bigger the plant, the better to have substrate.
So you'll notice the same design here. We got the standpipe, so gravity drain, standpipe in the center, larger pipe around it, which in this case is on the lower end, or the draining end. We should say this is the fill end and the drain end. And so we're about to have completed our cycle here, but we got a few more components that we need to go through. So you see here is the end view of the grow bed with the drain. We got the standpipe there. Collecting the water off the grow bed and moving on back to where we started, which was the sump tank. So one final component here. So here is the end view, or the end of our grow bed. Here the standpipe is in there, and you'll see that the standpipe runs down underneath and goes back into our sump tank.
And you notice that there's a filter pad on the sump tank because like we were talking about the sloughing of root matter and other vegetative matter. You don't want that going back into your fish tank. So you want to collect that, and you replace and rinse that pad every day.
So this center is the view of the standpipe at the drain end of the grow bed. You see it right there. That's what it looks like, just sticking up through the raft. With the hydrogen, and these cups are cups. Yeah. These cups are filled with hydrogen, so you do at least have some solid substrate. But if you're going to grow a big tomato plant, or like last summer, Bob grew a bunch of okra, amazing, beautiful, wonderful okra. But those are big, tall stalks, and they need a lot of support. So they do better with a solid.
They did. They even grew in here. They grew in the float beds, but they did better in
the solid stuff than in the raft system. All right, so there's your drain. And Bob, we've talked about our filter pads. So we actually have two filter pads here. See one up there on the mechanical filter on the inflow side of the grow bed, and then coming out of the grow bed, a second mechanical filter. We're all about, and I think that's probably one of the keys to success, is managing those solid materials. And you'll notice here, this is what it looks like. So we got a combination of lots of different types of organic matter. One of the interesting things is we grow a really awesome crop of snails. Yeah. Snails do really well in these systems, to the point that actually some of our colleagues who are doing experiments and maintaining salamanders will come and get small snails to feed the salamanders on a regular basis. Bob was telling me about this recently. But so you see the filter pad that collects the effluent from the grow bed there, and just one more view that shows you how the long end of the grow bed, or the grow bed's here, and coming down into the sump, and then our pump with our float valve, and then going back up into the fish tank. So we follow the water all the way around. It's for us, it's a low tech, simple system, nothing fancy, but it's been working pretty well for us for a while now. Just as a reminder, maintenance is really critical. It's not a lot. It's just a few minutes every day.
You're talking like 10, 15 minutes every day just to feed fish, wash off filters, put new filters in.
And that's it.
And it's a rotation of filters. It's not a brand new filter every day. You're just rotating between two filters.
All right. So just real quickly, here's a nice brand new filter being put in here. And we try to design these systems where it's pretty easy to grab it, take it over to a place where we can wash it off. So you see what it looks like after a day of collecting organics. And then we have a floor drain. It makes it very easy. Lay it down on the floor drain, hit it good and hard with the spray from the hose, and then swap it out with the second one.
And they'll last. I mean, I'll have to change out, put a new filter pad in like once every 2 or 3 months. I mean, I just rotate between two filters for, like I said, 2 months.
All right, so we haven't talked yet about what we're doing all this stuff for, but let's talk for a minute about plants. Just to start, Bob, let's just think in your head some of the things that have done well.
Well, you can see cabbage, lettuce does well, tomatoes do great, peppers, broccoli.
Okra was
Okra
amazing.
was
Yeah.
amazing, yeah. Basil is super in the summertime. It, gets knocked down in the winter because it gets frosted. But we're done tomatoes. I even did cantaloupe. Trouble with some of those things.
Cucumbers. Did you mention cucumbers?
Cucumbers, yeah. Peas. Trouble with like fruits like cantaloupe and even squash sometimes and strawberries is that the fruit are so close to the wet area that they'll lay into it and then they get rotted because they're laying on the wet substrate all the time.
And there are other systems that would probably help with that we don't use.
Yeah.
That you've probably seen some of these other types of systems like troughs, et cetera, that can be used to try to alleviate some of those issues.
Yeah.
But
this past year, what I did with the cucumbers is I had the vine come out of the tank and go outside, and that worked great because then I had cucumbers hanging off that were growing not into wet, but just hanging off the side, and that worked great until it got too big, and then it was like pulling the roots out of the floating tray.
And so you just see some examples of the stuff. In fact, let's see. Is that what you brought home last night for dinner?
That's the tomatoes.
The tomatoes that came home last night. You see, that was taken yesterday. These are our current videos. There's some kale that's still going strong in there, and then lots and lots of basil. The basil's doing really well.
I just harvested a bunch of cabbage in earlier spring. I grew a bunch of heads of cabbage.
All right, real quick, we're going to mention something else, and that is that how long have you been hatching tilapia now?
Probably 5 years.
5 years. So we hatch our own fish, or I say we don't. Bob is our fish husbandry expert here. Bob hatches all the tilapia that we stock in our system, and we have also in the past provided tilapia for other people, for schools to stock as well. But tilapia, as most of you know, are a rather weird tropical fish. They're not native. They're an exotic species. They are mouth brooders. After the female lays her eggs, the male fertilizes those eggs, and then she gathers those eggs up in her mouth and incubates those eggs in her mouth until they hatch. And in many cases, even the small fry will go back into her mouth. So she actually incubates those eggs and larval fish in her mouth, which means they have a very high rate of reproductive success. And we can take advantage of that. And so Bob does maintain a hatchery and has the capacity to produce thousands and thousands of tilapia every year if we were trying to crank them out year round, which we're not right now. But with just a few brood fish, we have the ability to do that. And it's not super complicated. But big thing you got to know is how to tell the males from the females. And I just put this sketch in here to kind of talk you through it, but you can, well, in fact, it might be easier to look at a photo, but you can visually inspect the fish to determine males and females and then pair them up. And what ratio do you use usually? If you're trying to go for full production, how many males and females would you try to pair up?
Probably 4 to 1 or 5 to 1. Yeah, probably 5 to 1. 5 to 1 ratio of females to males. Then check the females' mouths every 2 or 3 days for eggs, and then I'll hatch them from there.
All right, just a couple of quick rules of thumb as we're kind of getting on to wrap things up. One of the big questions we get a lot is, well, how do I size my system? And we're going to kind of do it forwards and backwards here. So we got a couple of rules of thumb that we'll mention. And one is to do it based on what you would like to yield, all right? And this is a conservative number, which is 1/4 pound of fish harvest for every gallon of volume in your tank. And that is conservative because we know that we and others have produced well over 1 pound of fish per gallon of water. Now that's I mean, if you imagine, just visualize a 1 pound fish in a 1 gallon jar. That's pretty tight. That's pretty dense. But people do it consistently with tilapia. That's one of the reasons people grow tilapia so much. But to go back more conservative, 1/4 pound per gallon, and therefore, if you say that you have a 200 gallon tank, then that would mean you would grow in that 200 gallon system about 50 pounds of fish, right? And we generally, when you're kind of up and running full speed, you stock our tank, the tank that you saw in the pictures, with 100 fish. How many fish do you normally stock?
Yeah, like 100 to 120.
Right. Yeah. So
ours is a 400, and we usually get over 100 pounds.
So that's a 400 gallon tank, and with a target production of about 100 pounds per growing season, and depending on how much you push it, 4 months, 5 months, something like that, to get those fish up over a pound.
But that's a good size to work with, because if you try to go more aggressive, you run into issues. So I mean, that's on a conservative. That's what you'd want to shoot for.
And then the other way this is sort of, I'm not sure how to hide that, but the other way to cover that, hopefully y'all can see the going backwards, which is based on the grow bed area. And that rule of thumb is for every square meter of grow bed surface area, not volume, but area, you would, it's 60 to 100. So we say about 80 grams of food per day, right?
Per meter.
Per square meter per day. So for every square meter of grow bed, you would be able to feed about 80 grams of food per day. Well, remember our 2% feeding rate. So if you do the math on that, that ends up meaning that, the day you're going to feed maximum is the last day you feed before you harvest. So at the end of your growing cycle, you're going to, we're using that same number. If you had 50 pounds of fish, if you wanted to harvest 50 pounds of fish, then the 2% would mean that you would be feeding on the last day before harvest. You'd be feeding a pound of food, 454 grams of food. And if you use that number and our rule of thumb up here, 454 grams of food for 80 at a rate of 80 grams per every square meter, it ends up meaning you could at that rate have a grow bed area of 5.7 square meters. Right? So you can do it however you want to do it, but this is a good place to start. This 1/4 pound of fish target harvest per gallon of water. Right, so that's just a couple of rules of thumb on sizing. And then a reminder here, we mentioned that 2% number. See, body weight consumed. See, 2% is down here for an adult fish or a fish that's pretty close to harvest size, which we try to get them over a pound before we harvest them. But that smaller fish, you see, really small fish will eat. They have a much higher metabolic rate and will eat at a much higher percentage of their body weight per day. So if you really want to maximize your production rate, you can use this and feed at a higher rate, and then gradually taper off as they get bigger. All right. So with just real quickly, this is an example. We've got a student who is actually working right now at an aquaponics facility up in Cumming, Georgia, in Forsyth County, and it's an outfit called Phil Ministries Aquaponics Farm. You see, they've got a pretty big commercial-sized greenhouse there. You see all of these rafts here.
Growing lettuce.
Growing a lot of lettuce. And then you see tanks along the wall here. And so just show you this operation now that they're up and running. They got one fully operational greenhouse, and they're in the process of, I think, getting up and running on a second greenhouse of the same size. And you see.
So those are all the tilapia tanks.
So there's their culture units. There's their fish tanks, multiple fish tanks on this end. And then you see two different systems, these tanks here and of two different for growing plants, and then the raft systems here. And you'll see very obviously they've got these staged filter pad systems, a different type of mechanical particulate removal with various types of media and multiple stages here for, again, the really critical part, which is removing the solids. You'll see that these have, they're staged in terms of the pore size, so that you start big and you get finer and finer and finer, and they are modular, which allows you to clean them as needed. And here's some examples of their tomatoes. This is what we call an ebb and flow, a bell siphon system. The water is delivered, it fills up to this level.
Well, delivers up in the top one.
I'm sorry, delivered in the top here. There we go, here. But when it fills up to this level, it breaks that siphon and these drain. So the roots are alternatively saturated and flooded and aerated, saturated, aerated on a continuous cycle. For certain plants, that they systems tend to perform pretty well. You see their tomatoes looking pretty good there in the ebb and flow system. You see they grow microgreens, they grow a lot of lettuce.
That's their seedling. That's where they grow their seeds.
And they've got some, see these little troughs here for getting their seedlings started on substrate as opposed to dirt. Seedlings on substrate as opposed to soil. And they get a lot of volunteers who do service projects where they go out there and work for the day, different organizations. And it's a pretty big outfit. They are marketing their stuff a variety of ways. I think you can get their lettuce. I think you'll find their lettuce right now already at the, is it the Forsyth Farmers Market? Is marketing their lettuce, and you see their tomatoes. And so that's an example of a larger scale operation that's up and running right now. Natalie Perkins is a UGA student who is working there with them on that project. And she said that if anybody wants to come and visit and tour, she's welcome. You're welcome to do that. And if you want the contact information, let me know, and I can get that for you. And then I wanted to give you a few resources. I think most of you are familiar with this, but just remember that online resources, the SRAC, the Southern Regional Aquaculture Center website, is a really, really good online resource. And you'll notice that aquaponics has become popular enough that it's actually got its own button here, right? And so you can actually click on that aquaponics section, and you'll see that they have organized the available fact sheets into aquaponics economics, procedures and practices, some aquaponics videos, design and construction. There's a specific section on water quality, and that's really, really critical. We didn't have time to go into water quality, but I would say that you know, if you have issues with mortality on fish, it's almost always water quality related, and you have to remember the difference between this and just intensive aquaculture is that we've got to think both about water quality from the fish perspective, and then water quality as a nutrient delivery for the plants. Nutrient delivery for the
One
plant.
quick note on that is, you know, the tilapia will eventually it'll make the water a lower pH. So I'll have to add sodium bicarb to lower that, but then the plants like the lower pH, so you have to balance, you know, what's low enough for the plants but high enough for the fish. So I always try to keep it in the 6s, low 7s.
6.5 is a good number. 6.5 to 7.
6.5 to 7 is what I try to shoot for.
So that's one of the water quality parameters that we measure every day, is to make sure over time you'll start to see this dip. And when you start to see that dip, if you allow it to continue, the system will crash. Will actually crash, and you'll have catastrophic mortalities of plants and tilapia actually. So we regularly maintain it with simple baking soda. We buffer our system and keep the pH where we need it to be. So let's see, to minimize that, I think. And let's see. There you go. There you have it. That's our show for today. And hopefully that was somewhat informative and entertaining. And Melissa, I guess now, if we got any questions or we want anything specific we want to discuss.
Yeah, we've still got, 10 minutes left in the hour. So if anybody has any questions, feel free. You can unmute yourself now, or you can type it in the chat, whatever works. So anybody have any follow-up questions for this? This was probably my favorite. I may be a little biased, but yeah. Thank you guys so much. We love the interactive videos and stuff. That's very helpful to wrap our heads around it.
Well, that was a last-minute experiment, and it did not fail. So I'm encouraged. But before we start, I would say this, that if there are, now we have the technology to do that. We've given the consideration of maybe doing some short YouTube instructional videos about specific aspects that you have questions about. So we might try to start putting some of those together.
Okay. All right. So Wade asked if you guys would like to share your slides. This will be archived, but if you wanted to send out slides as well.
Sure.
And
if you tell us how to do that, we'll share them with you, and you make them available through Julie Lynn or somebody.
Okay, great. And then Paul asked, what scale operation does it actually take to be profitable?
Yeah.
That's
a good question.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this, of course, is let me start by talking about, y'all have heard the whole lecture on small scale enterprise budgets and small scale farm operations, et cetera. So I won't bore you with all that stuff again, but we can speak from our own personal experience. So we have had a number of companies, like startup companies and investors, and especially people who are looking to sell equipment, approach us and want us to kind of endorse their systems. And we've been very hesitant and just basically said no to everybody that's asked about that. You'll hear about commercial scale operations in Atlanta. And then the most recent ones that I've heard about are actually in, of all places, in Hartwell. There's an industrial park out there in Hartwell that's trying to get up and running for aquaponics. But I'm old and conservative in terms of these types of enterprises. And what I want to see are the ones that are have been around for 8 or 10 years before I start saying, yeah, well, it clearly worked. But I can tell you that in other places where highly specialized marketing is an option, is available. So this tends to be in what we call, what do they call them? Food islands, or food. Anyway, food deserts. Where so the most profitable operation I've ever seen was down in the U.S. Virgin Islands, because they have to import all their food. So the cost of fresh food, fish and vegetables is very high there, but there are a lot of resorts. So they are marketing their products to resort hotels. We are seeing more and more in the city of Atlanta. I don't know if I think I might have mentioned this to you, Melissa. I had a conversation with the manager of a system that's being operated in the city of Atlanta by the Andrew Young Foundation. They're running a system there. It's a pretty big system, but it's not commercial. I say it's not commercial, just like this Field Ministries is not commercial. If you get all those volunteer hours factored into there, then your economics are very different than if you had to pay people hourly. You see, so that's the difference here. But that still needs to be.
And the other thing is, in our climate, we have a winter where the growing season, especially for the fish, you'd have trouble with temperatures.
Right. So the answer to that question, I know is complicated, but if you can sell lettuce for $5 a pound, then these systems at a fairly small scale, like the one we showed you, can be profitable. Because, but how big is the market for $5 a pound locally grown lettuce? So that's that. I know I'm beating around the bush here, but it's a really complicated question to answer because it's so market dependent. But that's really true of all of these small scale enterprises. It's just all about the market.
Awesome. Thank you. And Roger had a question that I forgot about. How are feed refusals measured to avoid overfeeding in your system?
Great question. So first thing is we recommend using floating food only, but floating food is more expensive. But with floating food, you can see that it's all gone. Now, I will tell you that if you stick to that 2% rule of thumb with tilapia, unless something's really wrong, that food will you will blink your eyes and that food will be gone. That's a conservative number, and tilapia can easily feed more than that. But the general rule of thumb is if there's anything floating uneaten after
You want to cut back. Yeah, you want to remove it.
yeah, after about 3 to 5 minutes, then you want to remove it and cut back. That's the general rule of thumb on that.
Cool. Martin asked, do the plants get all of the elements they need, or do you guys do any supplemental fumigation? And if so, how do you administer that evenly?
That's another really good question.
We haven't done anything supplemental on the plants.
But I will tell you that the bigger commercial operations that are successful and have been sustainable, and there are some big ones. They do they're set up with a contract to do tissue analysis, and they do supplement, and they guard those secrets very tightly as to what micronutrient mixes they add. But they're all based on frequent water and tissue testing. But it's all obviously very species specific. And we're still in the early stages of trying to select the ideal varieties for aquaponics. You know, the best aquaponics variety has not been established yet. People are just kind of experimenting and trying different things. But definitely certain varieties of tomatoes work better than others. Certain varieties of lettuce work better than others. So we're in the early stages of that kind of
we're kind
selection.
of evolving that, because I have my cherry tomatoes, which you didn't see because I just cut them down. I had an early summer crop of cherry tomatoes, but they grew right to the roof. So I cut them back down and they're starting to grow back again. But I only planted them 3 years ago, and they just continue to grow year after year
without
from the
reseeding,
roots.
just from the roots. Yeah.
Just from the roots. They die off with the frost comes, but the roots stay alive, and they grow back. So hopefully that's developing that tomato.
Any major issues with waterborne plant pathogens like Pythium? And then what kind of treatment or disinfection options are there?
You know, the biggest plant issues we have had probably would be every now and then we get those the little we have had some aphids a couple of times and white flies a couple of times. And you know, there are some organic
it's like a soap solution that you could spray on the leaves.
Crop oil and soap solutions you can spray on the leaves, and
but you got to be careful with when you're dealing with fish.
Right. So that's tricky. But there are a few things that are specifically effective for aquaponics. We haven't had too many other issues, but in terms of if we did, what would we do? And it definitely is a good idea. If we're doing this cold season, warm season rotation, every now and then between those two rotations, basically to just shut everything down. And we take a chlorine bleach is a really good disinfectant. And we will actually take our substrate and just soak it in 5-gallon buckets or just add some chlorine bleach solution to the substrate to clean it all and wash down the inside of our tanks and let them dry and before we restart up again. So that's the best, if you actually really got to nuke everything between cycles, that's really probably a good idea to, like, say, take one bed off of production and clean the substrate out.
And for insects, some places I think for the industry, they use the ladybugs.
That's right, ladybugs and lacewings also, because you got a greenhouse. They seem to do pretty well once you get them going, is to actually stock ladybugs and lacewings to control insect pests.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So any other questions? Because we are right at an hour right now. I'm not seeing any. So thank you so much. One thing that we kind of touched on is that Bob and Jay do a lot of work with schools and local small scale systems. So I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but if y'all have questions, they would probably be great resources because we're getting a lot of school questions.
Yeah.
Yes, I have schools contacting me with questions, so yeah, just, they can talk with us.
Yeah, they're going to be a great resource. So we will archive this and send this out. I will get with y'all about sharing slides to anybody who would like it, if y'all are good with that. And with that, that concludes this A&R hour. Thank you so much to Jay and Bob for joining us today and for walking us through the system. It's very cool. If y'all can ever get a chance to take a field trip out there, highly recommend it. So, thank y'all so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, and we'll see y'all later.
See y'all later.
Okay, cool. So we'll stop the recording there as people leave. And it's waiting on the room to empty out.
Well, that was right about an hour.
Perfect. That was awesome. That was so good.
I'm just glad the technology cooperated and then we didn't have a big failure.
Yeah, no, everything went really, really well. And it was good for them to see like the real life application of the film ministries and everything. So
yeah.
Yep. You're good to go.
I think we ended up with about 20.
Yes, we did. We did. We had 20 folks on there. So awesome. And I'm going to make a Georgia Counts report so I can get y'all the demographics if you need anything for your reporting.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
And I'm going to also circle back with Julie Lynn to see if she can see how many people retroactively viewed it.
Yeah,
because
that's
would
right.
be cool for your impacts as well. And then I think Wade was the only one that asked about sharing slides.
Sure. No problem.
But if y'all are okay with sharing the PowerPoint.
Yeah. The problem with it is it's huge because of those videos.
Right.
It's easy to make a PDF out of it, but it's not as cool.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
But we're fine with doing it. It's just the logistics of the best way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for sanity's sake, making it a PDF would be better. Just for distribution. And if somebody else wants the actual like videos and everything, maybe y'all can share via Dropbox or OneDrive.
We can do that. We can do that. Yeah. That video is shot at very high quality, and holy cow, those files are enormous. But but there are ways to to make that manageable. Right.
Awesome. Cool. So I think that's it. I'll copy you on the follow-up email to Julie Lynn. And who actually, so the Andrew Young Foundation does that aquaponics. Is it, where is it housed? Do you know anything else about it?
It's at a, they called me the other day and it's at a YMCA. I've got the actual contact information and the location, but it's at it's in a building with a Y. And I think the Andrew Young Foundation has an aquaponics system. And the reason they contacted us, they were really interested in looking into alternative foods that are less expensive than buying commercial fish food. Yeah. And he was really keen on things like duckweed to feed tilapia, because tilapia will eat duckweed. Yeah. And it's such a horrible invasive aquatic problem, exotic problem that it's abundant.
Would they get everything they need from the duckweed though?
Well, that's the big question. And there are certain varieties of tilapia zelii, which is not a species that we normally culture, but it is a true herbivore. It really is more of and most tilapia species are more of an omnivore. They eat everything. Yeah. But zelii in particular. But even if you could cut your food costs by 50% or 80%, that make a big difference at a big production scale. So in some cases, it's a really good supplement, but it doesn't completely eliminate or replace commercial food. Gotcha. So food is your biggest variable expense. Food and fingerlings, those are the two big ones.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, glad it worked out. And we look forward to hearing from you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank y'all.
All right, you have a good day.
See
All
ya.
right, you too. Happy 4th.
Okay, thank you. You too.
Bye.
All right.
So what's